Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month, we'll explore the true costs of the U.S. war against Iraq. We'll look at the financial costs, the human costs, and several other kinds of costs. We have three guests who will help us explore the topic, and they'll share their knowledge and their perspectives with us. I'm happy to welcome all three of our guests. Lori Davis is a retired colonel from the U.S. Army. She has a PhD degree and she's a certified nurse midwife. Her husband is an active duty doctor, colonel, stationed in the Middle East. Good to have you here, Lori.
Thank you.
Ivan Gonzalez was in the U.S. Air Force. He worked in medical supply at an Air Force Base hospital in Biloxi, Mississippi. He's out of active duty. He's currently in the inactive reserve. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
And Emily Lardner is a PhD who teaches writing at the college level. She's especially interested in clear communication, and she comes with a strong faith-based commitment to peace and justice. Emily, good to have you here.
Thanks.
So we're going to look at the costs, and let's start with some of the financial costs, in particular the kind of budget trade-offs. And Lori, I know that you have a concern about what happens to the budget when we have the war to be paying for.
Yeah, the war in Iraq, the costs financially are staggering. It costs the nation $5.8 billion monthly since this war began. And to translate that cost into some meaningful terms is that we could have funded the global effort on anti-hunger for 7 years with that money, or we could have taken funded the global effort for immunizations for 71 years. And we could have funded global AIDS effort for 18 years. That's a lot of lives that could have been saved and a lot of money that could have really taken care of some of our major problems in the world. To put it on a state level, our discretionary funding is going to be cut 9%, which means that every service in Washington state is going to be cut. There's nothing that's going to be spared. Education, poverty, housing, energy costs, clean water, there's nothing that will be spared.
And that's because there's the federal budget provides funding that comes through the states, so
Right.
when the funding is squeezed at the federal level, the
Exactly.
squeeze gets passed on to us.
Exactly, and that's going to translate into a 9% decrease in discretionary funding. And then to take it down even lower, Thurston County has paid $177 million for this war so far. And on an individual basis, each and every household in the United States has paid $2,000 into this war so far. And this is only financial costs.
You told me on the phone when we were preparing for the program that the U.S. government gave the Pentagon $21 billion more than it had requested the past 3 years, in spite of the rampant waste and abuse that we'll be talking about later on in the program. You've got concerns about child poverty.
Yeah. Yes, the United States, our child poverty is the highest of all industrialized European countries. We are about 3 to 5 times higher than Europe. And an example is that France poverty level, children poverty level is a little under 4%, while ours is 21%. That's 2 out of 10 children go to bed hungry every night in the United States. And what are we doing? We're going to cut, it's been proposed to cut food stamp program. It's proposed to cut the WIC program down.
That's the Women's Infant Children
Yes, sorry, the women's
program.
yes, the basic nutrition for pregnant women and women with young children. It's giving them the basic nutrition to make the brain cells grow and have healthy populations.
So we're going to be paying, those lower income people are going to be paying for this war for the rest of their lives with diminished brain cell capacity.
Oh yeah, and we'll continue to pay. The housing is going to be cut. Funding for energy assistance to the low income is going to be cut. Everything is proposed to be cut to the lowest of our income earners.
It's ironic from a political party that claims it supports family values, and here it's damaging children in that way. Education is being squeezed a lot, and you have...
Yes, 1 in 7 of our children don't graduate from high school now. And with those rates, how are we going to compete in the world? Another thing is the Pell Grants have been frozen for the last 3 years. And the Pell Grants basically supply money for students to go into the universities and colleges. And we need that level of education. And these grants are being frozen, and it's been proposed that the grants will be frozen permanently. And this is the same time that tuition has risen 25% in the last couple of years. So higher education is going to be unreachable for the majority of our population.
And you told me that the U.S. spends 16 times more on our military than do the top 5 major regional threats combined.
Combined, yeah.
And I've seen those kinds of figures elsewhere. It's just stunning the amount that we spend versus the
and
others.
we keep spending, and we're spending more and more to our military.
Yeah, and this war is on top of the regular budget besides. There's some good resource material I know you've looked up, and I've looked at also at the National Priorities Project, and their website is www.nationalpriorities.org, and they have just a wealth of information. They've broken it down by subject matter like you've done. They break it down to geographic levels.
Yes, it's an excellent site, but it's depressing.
It's depressing, but
the reality
we need to know.
Is depressing. Yes,
and
we
so
absolutely need to know.
Let's see. We've talked about environmental money is cut.
Yeah, Clean Water Act funding is cut, I think, by about 40%. Clean air. Now there's corporations in America are allowed to buy credits from other countries so that we can pollute more, but we just buy credits from other countries' pollution credits. So we can just continue the pollution.
Because they have the limits, the levels that are permissible are pretty high.
Yeah.
So for those countries that don't pollute up to the amount that they've been
Right.
allocated,
Yeah, we can pollute
We'll
more.
pollute, and we'll just buy the credit from them
Right,
to
right.
pollute up
right.
the difference.
Yeah, so the other countries might actually decrease their pollution so they can get paid for
Yeah.
cleaner air, while we will breathe the air that has been polluted
Yeah.
more.
Yvonne, you had worked in medical supply areas at a military hospital, and tell us what you saw, what you experienced.
Yes, I just got out of the active service, and my 4 years in the Air Force were kind of an eye-opening for me. Supply has the ability to command a lot of power, especially medical supply in a hospital. They are the ones allocated with the money, so I really realized how much waste and abuse happens while we're spending the taxpayers' money. You know, drugs that get expired and they just get destroyed instead of being using that for, you know, poor people or like other use it instead of just destroying it.
So as drugs, so they can be monitored as they get close to the expiration date and still be used while they're safe and effective.
Correct.
Instead of waiting until they expire and then just toss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have all kinds of WRM, they call it war reserve material, that they just keep collecting dust all the time, and as soon as the expiration is over, they go pull it out, check the inventory, replenish that, and they just get wasted. I mean, it's destroyed.
So they're not paying close attention to the resources that they're buying with our tax dollars.
No.
What else did you notice?
The end of fiscal year is another thing. We're supposed to have a 95%, yet the balance at the end of any fiscal year, 3 out of 4 years that I was there, just because the other year I missed it, we were way under. I mean, I'm talking 65, 55, and we had to have 95, meaning the way of people get trained about doing their business is not right. And since a lot of hands come into place, it's too much to handle for a lot of people, and the operation is so big that people are not trained well, and we're just wasting more material just like that. Yeah, I mean, issuing it the wrong way, getting it the wrong way, ordering it the wrong way. It's a lot of mishaps, a lot of abuse of taxpayers' money in there.
What would you recommend as a better way to take care of things? Are there some solutions that make sense?
Well, the basic thing, I mean, if people did their job right, and people were, I mean, they are trained right, but if people did their job and they actually pay attention to detail like they're supposed to, things will run smoothly. But just because people, you know, don't care.
There's no need to run smoothly now, though. The money is just being thrown at the military so much.
More than the military even needs, more than they ask for.
There's no incentive.
Yeah. One of the things that's astounding to me with all this money that's flowing out is that Bush and the Republicans in Congress are paying for this war not by saying, gee, we have to raise taxes to cover this cost. They're, you know, you hear people used to complain about the tax and spend Democrats, and these are the people now, the Republicans, who are spending but not having a tax stream. So they're just racking up this deficit, which means that everybody's kids and grandkids will be paying for this for the rest of their lives. And it causes just a lot of problems, because when you have those huge deficits, they got to keep floating bonds, and it's going to cause interest rates to go up. The Federal Reserve System has raised interest rates 10 times just relatively recently, and so bit by bit by bit, it's going to become more expensive for people to buy a house or buy a car or buy anything else where you have to take out a loan, and again, our kids and grandkids will be paying off that for the rest of their lives.
The only place I would differ with you on that, Glenn, is the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington, D.C. have had to cooperate to get the spending levels to be the way they are. And this is happening at a time when there's rampant math phobia in the U.S. So in a way, what we need is more ordinary people to be able to say, hey, the main way our government gets money is through taxes. It turns out under the current administration, as you say, taxes for individuals have, for the wealthiest individuals, have decreased. Taxes for corporations have really decreased. So the money coming in from taxes is shrinking. The money going out for the military is increasing. So yeah, absolutely, we have more debt. We have to pay the interest on that. There's less money. But it's been a collaborative effort on the part of the Democrats and the Republicans to make that happen. And it's going to take a collective effort on all of our parts to say, no, this is just crazy, crazy social policy.
Yeah. They've also been running this war off the regular budget.
Right.
So it's like they keep calling it an emergency thing.
Right.
It needs special appropriations.
Right.
And so when they run the budget, they say, oh, our deficit is X amount, and everybody says, oh, okay, well, that's a big deficit, but what the heck?
Right.
And then they tack this other stuff on,
Right.
$80 billion here,
And there's a
Right.
war we
another,
have to
another
fund,
80
yeah.
billion and stuff.
Right.
And that's not even counted in.
Right.
And it's not an emergency, it's not a sudden, unexpected thing. They've been planning this thing, and this is going on for now over 2 years on this Iraq thing.
Well, and people know you can't run your household budget like that. You can't go on and on month to month having this wild emergency expense that takes hundreds of dollars. You can't do that. And since we know that individually, it's a question of how would we come to know that collectively and say, no, we may not be experts in tax policy, but we do know this is crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
And also on that same subject, I mean, I was surprised to see at the end of the fiscal year how much people think about, in the military when I was in there, how much people think they get praised to spend all the money that is coming flying out of the sky, instead of saying, hey, we didn't use all the money today, this year, just cut it out and be praised because you were able to save some money.
Right.
They were penalized for not using all the money instead of being penalized for saving money. So
Right.
it's kind of like, just
Yeah.
Right, because you justify your next year's budget in terms of how much you spent this year, which is a backwards
Yeah.
policy.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there's been a little bit in the press, not enough, about the corruption and the lack of accountability from the favored companies like Halliburton, Dick Cheney's old company, and others, where they've been getting all these huge contracts without having to go through a real bidding process. And then when there have been even modest audits, they come up, you know, with billions of dollars unaccounted
Right.
for. And so,
And it's not even Dick Cheney's old company. He's still being
He's
paid
still-
$1 million a year by Halliburton.
Right.
And Halliburton has gotten billions,
Yeah.
$1.7 billion, and no competition.
Yeah.
That's, talk about conflict of interest. It's
So-
absolutely ridiculous.
So the financial costs are just astounding, and of course, one of the costs that people are concerned about is the cost to U.S. people's lives, and we'll talk also about Iraqi people's lives, but it seems like in this country we think first about American lives. And you know, we've had more than, as of the time that we're taping this program in mid-August, more than 1,800 U.S. people in the military who've been killed, and that's an undercount from what I understand, because this doesn't count the contractors, the mercenaries who are hired from other
Right.
countries to drive trucks and do all kinds of various things, and also doesn't count, as I understand, people who were injured there but died somewhat later after
Right.
leaving Iraq. But tell us, when we were talking on the phone to prepare for this program, you had some good insights into comparing what's going on there versus Vietnam.
Yeah, it's very different than Vietnam. In Vietnam, for every death, there was 4 injured. Now, instead, for every death, we have 9 injured. And that's because of the Kevlar, the protective Kevlar jacket and the helmets. It protects the body's main core. And what's resulting is that our soldiers over there are losing limbs, half their face, they're becoming blind, you know, they're losing, but they're living. That's the one reason is the Kevlar. The second reason is that basically an operating room is brought to the soldier and basic operations are done almost on site, and then they are transported back to the United States much quicker than they were in Vietnam days. In Vietnam, it took about 45 days for soldiers to be transported back, and that's a lot of different levels of care, a lot of different movements, which was detrimental to the soldier back then, resulting in more deaths. We're getting our soldiers back in 4 days, from battlefield to the United States to places like Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and that's saving lives. But the lives are so damaged because we have 3 triple amputees at the medical centers in the United States, the Army medical centers currently, at least 3 that I know of. That's triple amputees. Just think of that. 1 limb is left for this person, and God only knows what, kind of facial damage and sight and whatever. Our soldiers are heavily damaged, and these injuries are going to stay with them the rest of their lives. And they're expensive injuries, and they can't work, and on and on.
And the funding is not keeping up with the need.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us about that.
This year, April, it was proposed to have emergency funding for a little under, I think about a billion or maybe 1.9 billion, something like that, to help the VA keep up with this staggering new population they're dealing with resulting from the Iraqi war, and it wasn't approved. No new funding for the VA this year in the proposed budget, and the VA Veterans Association is seeing 1/4 of all people, all the veterans that there are from this war. They have seen 1/4 of them in their hospitals already for medical clinic, for psychiatric care, for different concerns. That's a huge increase in the amount of patients that they're used to seeing. And the number of veterans are going to increase, and so are the number of patients they'll be responsible for. And they're supposed to do it with no additional funding.
And you told me about the waiting list.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Currently, it takes about 6 months for compensation filing if they're injured to be filed, and actually they get their compensation claim in the system. And the average wait is 6 months, but it can take up to 2 years. And a proposal from the Bush administration right now is to decrease the amount of staff that is working on pushing forward these claims. So that is going to make the waits even longer, and combine that decreased staff with increasing numbers, and it's going to just take on and on. And our soldiers are going to come back, and they're going to be bankrupt, and they're going to lose their home, and they're doing this right now. Many of the reservists are going in and coming back, and their businesses have failed because they've been gone so long, and they're taking care of medical and mental problems.
So it's one thing to have rhetoric that says support the troops and campaign on it, and it's another thing to actually provide the funding for the funding and the services that would actually do that.
Well, there's roadside stands. I drove by 2 days ago, asking for contributions to support our troops. Do we have to bake cookies so our troops get medical care?
Yeah, let alone the other needs that you mentioned earlier for
PTSD,
children's health and education
and all the needs we had before
else.
the war started.
Yeah. There's the post-traumatic stress disorder was serious, has been serious in past wars, and it sounds like it's just really horrendous now with this.
Yes, it doesn't go away with this war. It gets worse. And we don't have the facilities to take care of it. Mental health has been an issue in the United States for many, many years, and just the staggering new numbers of people requiring care, we can't keep up.
Other thoughts about how does this strike you? How does this fit into the context of what we're talking about with the costs of the war?
I think it's astonishing, Lori, when I hear you talk about the situation of veterans. I think I don't understand what our public leaders think we think about that, because it's so clear that the veterans are not going to be supported when they get home, only looking at that problem. I was talking to some men who live in the DeVoe Street shelter who are vets themselves, Vietnam vets, and they were saying a year ago, you know what's going to happen? The vets from this occupation are going to end up just like us, and there aren't going to be shelters for them. So in a way, I think it turns out these men who are living in shelters actually know the score way before ordinary middle-class people in the U.S. are even willing to say, what in the world is happening?
But you don't see this on TV.
No.
The ordinary citizen is getting sound bites and propaganda and spins, and that's all they're seeing. We are not feeling the pain unless you go and look for it. You have to read books. You have to read newspapers. You have to listen to
Right.
Channel 22. You have to
and
investigate and dig.
And visit the homeless shelters
Right,
and talk with people
right.
about the realities.
Right.
So,
Our veterans' employment rate is twice that of their contemporaries who haven't gone to Iraq, twice as high.
and that's something that needs to be told when people are being recruited. And we'll talk about
Yeah.
recruiting in a minute. I know you have some concern about the recruitment thing. When we're talking about the ways in which the veterans are being impacted by this thing, your husband is away for a year, overseas stationed, working as a doctor. And you mentioned a few minutes ago other people who, like reservists, who had not expected to be deployed that long, and then they end up losing their jobs or their businesses or whatever. What's going on with that?
Yeah,
how does that work?
I feel relatively lucky that our salary has stayed the same with my husband deployed, but the reservists, most of the reservists, or not most, but a large percentage of the reservists, when they go active duty military, their salaries go way down, but their bills don't go down. Their house payments stay the same, their car payments stay the same, food costs stay the same, you know, so they're really under economic hardships. You know, so they're missing their spouse or their father or their brother or sister or whatever, plus they have the economic strains that they have to deal with.
And Yvonne, you've, in preparing for the show, you expressed some concerns about the recruitment function.
Yes.
So from what Lori is saying, how does that fit in with your concerns?
I mean, the concern that I have mainly is that the way the recruits go about, they go to minority schools where, you know, people, and they basically engulf the kids and say, hey, you got to go because you don't have any other options. It's either this or flip burgers, you know, things like that. And they don't go to the high-rich suburban high schools or colleges. They go to where the people that need the money and sell this without really telling the whole story. They don't really lie, but they don't really tell them what it's going about. And being at that age is so easy to be, oh yeah, I mean, I want to do this, and they show all this technical stuff and all these super duper things that they're going to do, and when they get to their jobs, they realize, what did I do?
Yeah.
So they're lost. And for instance, myself, I mean, I'm the very first one to ever gone in the service. And I went a little bit late, and I'm glad I did. And I realized, I mean, well, it's a means to an end. I'm using the GI Bill for right now. But that's what got me, the GI Bill, because I was already getting red tape when I was trying to work and go to school and, you know, using financial aid. And I was already at the beginning of using, you know, bouncing check to check and trying to make it. So when I saw the GI Bill, 4 years of my life, it's not such a bad deal, and I'm using it right now. And a lot of people think that way, but at the same time, they don't tell them what the backlash of that will be, especially right now. I went before 9/11, but now they're recruiting like really hard.
A lot of the guys, I've seen some figures on this. In fact, I just read some stuff, I think last night or this morning, that very few people who are in the military get actually much benefit out of the college stuff. It costs you money. You got to put money into it. Yes. People don't realize. So it's not like the GI Bill after World War II that was basically a free ride through college. This is much of it is your own money that you've had to put in while you're in the military, and a lot of people don't get that money out. It's non-refundable what you put in, and very few people get much out of it, and so the odds are already stacked against you from what I've been reading, and I've read a number of sources on that.
And another thing is also, like, when you're inside, it's so easy to get in trouble. And if you get out of the military, even though it's an honorable discharge, but it says it has notations other than honorable or, you know, medical or whatever, they deny those.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, you put in your money, and then at the end of the whole thing, a little trouble here and there is it's all it takes for you not to use your money. And it takes biting your tongue a lot of times when you're inside, not to say the wrong thing to the wrong person, because you get screwed.
Yeah. You mentioned also when we were talking to prepare for the show the difference between the folks at the bottom levels versus the higher ups. What was your experience, or what are your insights about that?
Well, first of, I mean, I was enlisted, and the officers have the hand by handle, so they control things, and a lot of them are really young and immature when they come in. A lot immature than, you know, I went, again, I guess my case is a little different. I went a little older. I went when I was 27. So I already had been in the job. I already had done a lot of things in my life before I went inside. I went just because of the GI Bill again. But when I saw these young, you know, butter bars, they call it, or lieutenants, or like, you know, second lieutenants, doing things that they have no clue about, especially when they come to supply where I work. And they try to get things their way, and they think by, like, the analogy that I use is, I scratch my back, you scratch my back, and there's a lot of that stuff, and a lot of bureaucratic, and a lot of corruption, like, yes, out there for everybody to see, and nobody says anything, because most people are like, yeah, trying to make a living out of the military. I already knew that I'm not gonna stay after 4 years, so I don't have anything investment on it other than the GI Bill. So I said, why do people do this? And I realized how the system works, and it's corrupt. And I realized that, and I had more faith in the system before I went in. Once I got out, I lost my faith in the system.
I spent 23 years in the healthcare branch of the military, and I wouldn't say it is corrupt. I would say we wasted money, but what mostly angers me about military recruitment now, though, is that we're taking away options to the lower levels of society, or lower economic levels of society, taking away all their options and making the military the only option almost.
So they're getting channeled into that because you can't make it. You can't get the Pell Grants, you can't get the other stuff.
This is going to be almost the only option, which is very, very scary to me.
Right.
There's another cost to the war that doesn't get talked about, and there's a cost in the integrity and accountability of the government and the people who run the government to be accountable for the decisions they make. And instead you have people who refuse to admit that they made any mistakes, and as we're taping this program in mid-August, Cindy Sheehan, whose son was killed in Iraq, is trying to get a chance to talk to Bush about this, and she's being hassled and harassed, and
he won't even talk to her.
Won't even talk to her.
A mother with a dead son.
Yeah, so you know, there's just no accountability, and there's a cost to the integrity of the government, and I think the people in the country feel that. I think that it comes out in all these different ways. The slippery contracts to Halliburton and all these other things. There is chipping away at I think the moral fiber of the country to be doing this kind of a war, and I think people don't realize that as a cost. Enough.
Yeah, I visited Europe a couple months ago, and everyone I sat down to have a conversation with asked me, what is going on in America? And what, did you vote for him? And I said, no, I didn't, and I don't think most people did vote for him. You know, but I had to explain that not all Americans are behind our present administration, and to try to defend it, because the world is afraid of us, which is, I don't think, a good position to be in.
For many years, people in other countries have made a distinction between what the government does versus the American people. You know, we've run into this in Central America for decades, you know, for example, or with the Soviet Union decades ago, where people say, well, okay, your government is doing some bad things, but we realize the American people don't support, you know, those atrocities and things. And lately, my understanding is that people are saying, how can you let this go on year after year after year? Maybe the American people do want this. Maybe this is a cynical way to get our oil, or to run roughshod over our
And by not opposing it, we're supporting it. I believe. And we're going along with it, at least.
We haven't talked about the costs to the Iraqi people, and the cost of this war related to the Iraqi people. And I wonder if anybody has
Well, when I think about Cindy Sheehan in the U.S., one mother who's lost one child, and she happens to be in the U.S., and she is in the best sense of the word, she is crazy with grief and rage about the senseless loss of someone she loves. And then I think about the people in Iraq and the social structures that I take for granted. I assume that I have reasonably clean water. I assume that when I flush the toilet, the sewage is going to be treated. I assume that I have reasonable access to medical care. I assume I have access to food. And when we learn that 90% of the sewage in Iraq goes right into the rivers, which means people are dying of diseases that we know are preventable, and I think if I were a mom in Iraq and I had no electricity and my kids were drinking water that had raw sewage in it and I had no medical care and I didn't have adequate food, I don't know what I would do. I don't know how I could begin to make a distinction between the U.S. government and the U.S. people, especially if I knew that many people in the U.S. had clean water and I didn't. Mm-hmm. So the cost to the people in Iraq of the from the 1991 invasion on through the sanctions into the current occupation and bombing is extraordinary and tremendous, and we can't even, I don't think, in most parts of the U.S. begin to imagine what it would be like to live under those material conditions.
And it's persistent and it's bipartisan and it's deliberate. I mean, documents have come out showing that at the time of the first Gulf War in 1991, the Pentagon was actually targeting electrical systems, water purification systems,
hospitals,
sewage treatments. We targeted
schools.
Hospitals. We actually targeted those in 1991 to hit, and then we refused to let them rebuild them. We refused to let them rebuild their sewage treatment plants and their water systems and so
then
forth.
we call it insurgents. We say, wow, violent people. And I think, what in the world would we, what would I do if I was looking at the people I love slowly die of uranium poisoning, of breast cancer, of bladder cancer, of bone cancer, starving? What would I do? I'm not sure.
Well, and when we had targeted hospitals, and then during the decade when we wouldn't let them import glass to replace the windows of the hospitals.
Right.
I mean, what kind of...
And
we put ourselves out as a nation that cares about human rights and freedom and liberty and democracy.
As a Christian nation.
And we, a Christian nation, looking down on other people.
Yeah, we just don't act very
Christ-like. And we won't let them, and we actually prohibited them from replacing the glass that we had destroyed in their windows of their hospitals.
But see, then here's where I have to move in my thinking. I think, all right, so we can rehearse these facts about the consequences of U.S. policy on the Iraqi people, but at some point we have to say as people in the U.S., no, I won't countenance this anymore. And we can march around all we want with signs that say we don't believe in this, but nothing is changing. It hasn't changed in 14 years, and we have sanctions on other countries like Cuba that have similar effects. This is our most acute and dramatic incidents of wreaking havoc on another society. So, Lori, when we were talking earlier, your question was, what will it take for people to wake up? What will it take to move people to action? Really direct, concerted, collective action that says, we're tired of talking about this, and we expect the people of the world to hold us, me, you, accountable for what is happening in other people's lives, because who is responsible if not us? And we can't say, oh, our government is so awful and we feel really bad about that, and golly, now I'm going to go,
But I didn't vote for him,
I'm
so
going to go watch a movie.
Right,
That is
We're
not good enough, because people are dying.
Right.
Yeah, and deliberately. I mean, it's a deliberate policy of our government.
Right.
And if we believe in democracy, then even though we might not have voted for that government, we still have responsibility to change
it's our
it
government.
one way or another.
That's right.
Is doing things in our name and is doing it with our tax dollars.
Right.
And we still need to take responsibility to do whatever it takes to turn things around.
And if we don't, it's not only our country that's in danger or Iraq, it's the world.
It's
world
the world.
domination will not The world cannot survive our
Right.
attempts at world domination.
Yeah.
I don't believe we can survive this.
Yeah, it's not a
a
sustainable
world.
policy.
Yeah,
Because the
it's-
rest of the world won't let us do
Right,
it.
to
Yeah.
put it mildly.
Yeah.
Well, and if they don't have the weapons that we have, they'll find ways that they can.
Right.
Maybe they can get back at us
Like
with something
airplanes or
something in a
toxins,
suitcase
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah,
And
that
so
will
when
happen.
we look at this at like terrorism as those bad people, but what they're doing is they're using the means that they have at their disposal to
Right.
get back at us when we have this gross disproportionate
And
amount
it
of
isn't
we have
even,
thousands of
even
nuclear
the
weapons, and that
language,
doesn't protect us.
even the language of get back at us, I think, again, if I were in Iraq and I was holding my son while he died, and I knew that the means to save his life were available, except not to me, because millions of people in the U.S. were too busy,
Right.
going to their jobs and going out to dinner
Having
and
a life.
watching movies.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would do. And so when people don't listen, when we don't listen, you have to find a way to be heard. And I don't, it's easy to say from my perspective as a middle class person in the US, I don't really countenance violence. That's a pretty easy position to take.
Right.
But if I had to make myself heard and I was being that unheard by people who are being so callous with the people I love, I don't know what I would
Right.
do.
Yeah, Egyptian President Mubarak came out and commented on that what we have created in Iraq has caused so much hatred in the Arab world that has led to the creation of 100 Osama bin Ladens, if not 1,000 by now. The hatred we're growing
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's
is unstoppable at this point right now.
One of the factors in this, but not the only one, of course, is oil. I mean,
Right.
Iraq has the #2 amount of reserve after Saudi Arabia in the world, and then the Bush regime seems gearing up to make a war on Iran, which is another one of the major oil resource countries. And when we were preparing for the program, you said that there's a pattern of this, our foreign policy in oil. Tell us what you had in mind.
Well, again, I'm no expert on U.S. foreign policy or the politics of oil, but what I know is that our government, our society, the U.S. society, is really predicated on the consumption of oil. And periodically we go through periods of awareness. People joke about Jimmy Carter with his sweater, and there's been some outcry about drilling in the Arctic wilderness. But what our government can count on is that when the local paper has a headline that says gas prices are going up again, most middle-class people will say, yikes, I don't want to pay that much, and will fuss and fret about the cost of gasoline. And what's invisible is how my desire for cheap gasoline justifies my government's actions in the Middle East. It will be used to justify our government's actions in Venezuela. And the louder I am in my complaining about the price of gasoline, the more I give weight to the government saying, hey, our people want oil, we're going to get oil. And that, I think for too long, our dependence on other people's oil and the gasoline at the center of our economy in a certain lifestyle has been undiscussable because it has seemed so complicated. I don't understand oil. I don't understand where it comes from. But even the basic economics of it are beginning to be so clear that I think we have to say, yikes, what are we agreeing to when we complain about our gas prices? What are we tacitly consenting to?
And what are the real prices of that gallon of gas?
Right.
It's our family over
Right.
in the Middle East. It's
Right.
death and destruction.
Yeah. Another thing that we talked about in preparing for the show was your concern about health care. I guess it's probably all of our concerns about
Yes.
health care system in this country. And when earlier in the show, when we talked about how the war is siphoning off money that people need for health care, one of the remedies that you're working for, and I guess you're working on too, I didn't know that, is a single payer system that would take the profit out of it and make it more of a human right, and have a simplified system that would actually save money, but we're hung up and can't go there because of the business and politics of it. Tell us what about this approach that you're advocating.
Yes, I'm new to it, and the Just Health campaign is proponing that universal health care, just like Canada does or like Cuba does. And the thing that got me into it really is that I saw the waste that happened while I was in the military and medical supply. And like, I was like, we're throwing all this away. We have healthcare for profit. And how could these people be benefiting? All the pharmaceutical companies could be benefiting from the well-being of human beings here on our country. We don't need to go anywhere else but here. So I was like, I was like, duh. I mean, I'm waking up to a lot of things, but I was like, that was a big shocker. I mean, yes, we need to realize that healthcare should be a human right. Everybody should be able to be taken care of when they need it, right away. Now, I mean, not waiting, not checking for insurance, not checking for if they qualify for this, if they qualify for that. It's just bogus. It's just.
You had the experience not too long ago being with a friend who collapsed, and
I was. There's like that. There's many stories. My friend all of a sudden it was one of those hot days. She hasn't been eating too much and drinking coffee, so she dehydrated. And the first thing is like they call me, hey, your friend is in the hospital. I go check her out. And the first thing they ask me, what's her last name? And the first thing I think, I don't know if she has insurance. No, she's a student just like me. So I'm like, if I give her last name, I don't know. I mean, they're gonna check her insurance and they're gonna, right away charge her. And like, so I didn't even say her last name because I was literally, not afraid, but I was like kind of covering for her because I didn't know if she had insurance or not. And I don't think you should be able, in this country, the richest country in the world, you should be able to worry about those things when you actually are in the ER being taken care of.
And she had also said to you, I think this is right, I don't want to go to the hospital, or I can't go to the hospispital, I don't have insurance.
She was already worried what she's sick.
Yeah.
What kind of, I mean, that is just, it's awful. It's just not right.
And the funny thing is that the United States spends more per capita on healthcare than any other country.
Of course.
But our system is so inefficient because it's based on profit, and it runs through all these redundant insurance companies, and there's so much money chewed up in the redundancy of the paperwork processing and high cost for advertising and corporate executive salaries.
Company is the
all
top
that,
earner.
Yeah,
well,
all that
and
stuff.
I think that's what's so appealing about the Labor Party's Just Healthcare campaign, because again, this question of universal healthcare, health insurance, that is complicated. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm just an ordinary person. And so starting from the place of saying, should it be a universal human right? Other countries manage to pull it off. Could we pull it off? Because once you get to the place of even imagining that people should have basic health care, then it gets easier to say, oh, right, okay, so now what do we do about it? But it's about getting really clear about it.
Yeah, because all the other civilized industrial countries do that.
Right.
And we're the only ones left that really don't do it at all.
Right.
And yet we pay the most, and then we have 45 million people who have no health coverage at all, including your friend. And we're actually way down the list in terms of indicators of health well-being, infant mortality and this and this and this and this.
We're 15th in infant mortality among industrialized countries. 15th. That's disgusting. That is
So I want to give
horrendous.
the website for the method that you mentioned, this Just Healthcare. It's www.justhealthcare.org. And there's another one that I actually belong to that's working on the same thing at the Washington State level. It's called Healthcare for All, Washington. And their website is www.healthcareforallwa.org. That's Healthcare for All, Washington. And they're working for a single payer system that would cover everybody in this state. Because it may be that one of the things that we can do is do this on a state-by-state basis until the federal government finally figures out that that's what the people want. But again, one of the costs of this war is that we keep getting distracted from things that we should be paying attention
Right.
on, and the money gets soaked away. And although these healthcare things, the one that you folks are working on and this other, would actually cost less, the same or less, and the one that you're working on actually has a plan for financing it that transitions so
Right.
that the people who are currently in the system processing paperwork can get retrained for other jobs without a loss of salary.
Right.
So, let's see. We've talked about a number of things here. There's this notion of quagmire. We're starting to run down toward the end of the hour,
Yeah.
and the quagmire thing keeps coming up. People keep saying, "This is a quagmire," and the official people say, "No, no, no, we're not in the quagmire." And the rhetoric that they have sounds very much like the Vietnam stuff. You know, oh, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and oh yeah, you know, as soon as we can get these local folks trained, then we can go, but that might be years down the road.
Right.
And meanwhile, we're building 14 permanent military bases, and we're building the biggest embassy anywhere in the world in Baghdad.
And insurgencies are growing disproportionately. There we started out 4,000 a year ago. In 1 year's time, we went from 4,000 to like 40 to 10 times the amount.
Yeah.
And this is growing by year,
Yeah.
so our problem is just multiplying and multiplying. It is a quagmire. I
Yeah.
think that's the best definition I can think of.
So help us think. Does anybody have any thinking about what we should be doing? We know we
Quagmires.
shouldn't be doing. What are there some recommendations, or what's your analysis of this?
I think one of the hardest things about coming to understand how these things that we've been talking about are connected to each other is the more we know, at least in my experience, the more I'm tempted by despair, because I think I don't have a clue how to solve all this as I understand how things are connected. So I think it's really important for people to know there are very ordinary, sensible ways to begin to act in a more life-affirming, sustainable way. Little things. If you're not already at the food co-op, which privileges local food, less transportation, less consumption of oil, healthy farmland, then shop at the food co-op. If you don't already use the bus, use the bus. If you don't already try to ratchet down a materialistic lifestyle, then ratchet it down. So there are some ordinary, gentle practices people can use in order to say, it's okay to wake up to understanding how we're implicated in this. There are other ways to live. There are small steps to take that are really a counter to the despair that comes with understanding, wow, my life depends on, right now, the suffering of people in other countries, and I don't know how to live with that. So, I want to be part of a community. I want to have friends who say, there's alternatives, there's other ways to live.
And one other thing is to make sure that the government doesn't do the same mistake in Iran that they're already doing in Iraq, and they're laying the
Or
groundwork.
Venezuela, and they're doing the
Venezuela's
same thing
another
with
one.
Venezuela.
And because the propaganda is out there,
Right.
and like they complain about Iran and nuclear weapons,
Right.
Iran is actually in compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
The United States has been out of compliance for
Right.
decades on a bipartisan basis. No matter who's in the White House, no matter who runs Congress, the United States has been out of compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty for decades.
Right.
But the government is
that's
counting
not in the
on
press.
us not to notice. And
Yeah.
it's counting on us when push comes to shove, us being middle class people, to act in our own interest and not in the interest of other people. They're counting on us to put a certain materialistic lifestyle ahead of people's lives in other countries.
And they're counting on us to only listen to the news, the
Yeah.
propaganda out there,
Yeah.
and not go beyond it.
Yeah.
Also, one thing is like we have the tendency, at least personally, I had the tendency to wash my hands. I'm just one person. What can I do about all this? It's right in front of us. We can see it. We don't need to be experts about it. But if we just begin to organize, like Emily was talking, at the personal level and at the community level, to start looking at other interests and see other people's interests, see them as yours, and actually act upon those things, and start teaching each other what we know.
Right. Yeah, and we have 2 peace vigils in this town every week. There's Wednesday noon hour in Sylvester Park, right at the corner of Legion and Capitol Way, and another one on Friday 4:30 to 5:30 or 4:30 to 6 as long as daylight savings time holds out, at the south end of Percival Landing right at the corner of 4th and Water. And then Women in Black on 4th Avenue across from the Oyster House from 5 to 6 on Fridays. So,
And there are these action/study groups that started to form in July at the event called Bringing It Home, Organizing Local Resistance to the Occupation in Iraq. That group met again in August, or is meeting at the time of this taping, and those groups will be moving forward throughout the fall on various local campaigns to, as you were saying, Yvonne, educate each other, organize locally to say, no, we're very serious about this.
There's many, many groups in Olympia that you can join, so many groups, and get, I think you have to get active I have to be active just to keep my sanity.
Yeah.
Because to stop me from going into despair.
Yeah.
And there's Code Pink is another excellent group, and Veterans for Peace is another excellent group. There's so many groups, you can't name them in one program, but they're out there, and we just need to get involved and stop this.
yeah.
have to
And
stop
we need
this.
to, one of the things is for us to take the initiative, and rather than just react and react and react, but to put it out there that says, Bush actually did lie to us. He lied to Congress, lied to the United Nations. He's violating international law. Those are impeachable offenses,
yes.
and he needs to be held accountable. And we need to hold our Congress people accountable, because we have people from this state who are pretty wobbly on some of these issues. They're not consistently standing up for peace, and we need to hold all
We
those people
really
accountable.
need to support our troops, and that's by impeaching Bush, I think.
Well, and I have this vision that we will, by the time of the holidays in December, we will have sat long enough in City Hall, at the state capitol, even in Washington, D.C., and said, no, we won't work, maybe we won't eat, we won't move, we won't go, hundreds of us, until people say,
Hundreds
okay.
of thousands.
There's a strong history, especially in recent decades, of nonviolent resistance to unjust governmental policies and
we can do
dictatorial
this.
governments, and we need to really study up on that and practice it.
Right.
We're just about out of time, but we'd be happy to take just a quick closing comment from each of you, the three of you, in any sequence that you may want. But it'd be nice to have a closing comment from each of you, and then we'll wrap this up.
Just plead with everybody to get involved, because if you're not part of the solution, you're going to be part of the problem. We've heard that, and it's true. Get involved, do something, save our country and our world.
Okay.
Basically the same thing. I mean, stop washing your hands thinking you just want a lonesome person that can't do nothing. If you start cooperating and teaching each other, we can do a lot of things. We can change this. There's no way why we can.
We could begin by just sitting in City Hall and sitting there for a week and saying, no, we don't want our city or our county involved in this.
Okay, well, thanks to Lori and
Thank
Yvonne and Emily, and thanks to all the folks who've been watching. For information about a variety of activities that relate to peace and social justice and nonviolence, you can contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. If you have an interest in any of the other organizations that we've talked about, or any of the other issues or movements or activities, we can refer you on to those. You can contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at area code 360-491-9093. You can visit our website at www.olyfor.org. We're all one human family, and we all share this one planet. We can make a better world, but we all have to do our part, and the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks for doing as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
nurse midwife. Her husband is an active duty doctor, colonel, stationed in the Middle East. Good to have you here, Lori.
Thank you.
Ivan Gonzalez was in the U.S. Air Force. He worked in medical supply at an Air Force Base hospital in Biloxi, Mississippi. He's out of active duty. He's currently in the inactive reserve. Good to have you here.
Thanks.
And Emily Lardner is a PhD who teaches writing at the college level. She's especially interested in clear communication, and she comes with a strong faith-based commitment to peace and justice. Emily, good to have you here.
Thanks.
So, we're going to look at the costs, and let's start with some of the financial costs, in particular the kind of budget trade-offs. And Lori, I know that you have a concern about what happens to the budget when we have the war to be paying for.
Yeah, the war in Iraq, the costs financially are staggering. It costs the nation $5.8 billion monthly since this war began. And to translate that cost into some meaningful terms is that we could have funded the global effort on anti-hunger for 7 years with that money, or we could have funded the global effort for immunizations for 71 years, and we could have funded global AIDS effort for 18 years. That's a lot of lives that could have been saved and a lot of money that could have really taken care of some of our major problems in the world. To put it on a state-wide level, our discretionary funding is going to be cut 9%, which means that every service in Washington state is going to be cut. There's nothing that's going to be spared: education, poverty, housing, energy costs, clean water. There's nothing that will be spared.
And that's because the federal budget provides funding that comes through the states, so when the funding is squeezed at the federal level, the squeeze gets passed on to us.
Exactly, and that's going to translate into a 9% decrease in discretionary funding. And then to take it down even lower, Thurston County has paid $177 million for this war so far. And on an individual basis, each and every household in the United States has paid $2,000 into this war so far. And this is only financial costs.
You told me on the phone when we were preparing for the program that the U.S. government gave the Pentagon Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month, we'll explore the true costs of the U.S. war against Iraq. We'll look at the financial costs, the human costs, and several other kinds of costs. We have three guests who will help us explore the topic, and they'll share their knowledge and their perspectives with us. I'm happy to welcome all three of our guests. Lori Davis is a retired colonel from the U.S. Army. She has a PhD degree, and she's a certified